14 acres. Down in the valley where wild roses tangle with primrose and hollies, in an indolent cradle, we often had trouble distinguishing fact from fiction, but we really needn't worry until our palms start itching. Every afternoon, trooped through twigs and berries, while out searching for the headstone where my mind was buried. It was no longer moving, Lord, it was no longer kicking. Still, we had no need to worry, for our palms were not itching. Onward we stumbled, through bramble and muck, with 10 vultures swarming over us, denoting a patience so robust. Shoo, go away, until you see the sign written. We continued on our course, for our palms were still not itching. Past a wolf and a tortoise and a horned owl too. Saw a rattler who was bitten by his own pestilent tooth. That Ouroboros coiling with its cyclical shifting, but we carried on, ignoring the growing inkling. After all that mess we made back in the bramble, sent those vultures diving down to us to feast upon our gamble. Now the bush is barren and the tarts have lost their filling, for we touched the poison oak, and now our palms are finally itching. So, this is the first poem in Gabrielle Bernthal's collection, Honey Never Spoils. You may be wondering, who is Gabrielle Bernthal? She's one of my subscribers. That's right, Gabrielle and 11 other poets all sent me their published books, and I decided to make a video about them. Now, 12 books is, I think, more than I've ever had to read for a video, so full disclosure, I spend 30 minutes with each of these books. For the sake of this video, I want to make this very simple. For each book, I'll summarize any introductory or prefatory material. I'll then highlight my favorite poem from the work, share some overall thoughts, and then offer a suggestion of what I'd like to see more of from each poet in their future works. And before I really get into it, let me say what I always say on the second channel. I'm not a professional reviewer, I'm just some guy on the internet who likes reading and writing. The opinions expressed in this video are only opinions. My interpretation of or reaction to the work will not be the same as everyone else's, for better or for worse. No matter what I say, don't be too hard on yourself, and please keep writing. And for those in the comments, please be respectful. And I apologize in advance for any mispronunciations of authors' names. Oh, and I also want to point out that a lot of these collections are self-published, or published by smaller presses. So there are some copy editing errors and typos here and there, but that's not what this video is about. I'm sure if I self-published, there would be loads of mistakes. I'll add that none of the authors in this video have paid me or compensated me in any way, but all of them provided their books to me for free, for which I am very, very grateful. Lastly, the order the books appear in this video is random. So in Gabrielle's case, her introduction tells the story of her experience bringing her own copy of a Poe book to class to annotate. Her teacher was impressed and started giving her extra assignments and writing prompts. We love students who are motivated and English teachers who go the extra mile. The introduction is also nice for some of Gabrielle's own thoughts about poetry. There's also a sweet message in there about the book's title, which is also the title of one of the poems in the work. I can't help but read it as a challenge to Robert Frost's Nothing Gold Can Stay. But anyhow, back to the poem. This is both the first poem in the collection, and it also happens to be my favorite. This poem is extremely interesting to me because it reads as highly allegorical, but also based on a real-world experience. A bunch of kids going out into the woods, bumping into some strange things, ultimately touching poison ivy. I like that as a premise. There's a lot to explore here with each and every symbol. And as far as settings go, this is super intriguing. And you longtime viewers know my thoughts on repetition, but I actually quite like this refrain too. This is, in my mind, an exemplary use of repetition because the repeated phrase takes on more and more meaning as the poem goes. It also doesn't even show up in the penultimate stanza, which is a rather interesting surprise. What's more, I'm a big fan of slant rhymes, and we have plenty here, as well as in the other poems. I will say this line, denoting a patience so robust, I'm not sure that quite scans, but that's not a huge deal. More than anything, I just like how open this poem is to interpretation. I've gone over it multiple times now, and part of me reads it as a metaphor for maturation. It kind of reads as a group of children learning about the harsh realities of the world. Hence the refrain, the world's incidental cruelty finally affected our speaker and their group. Another part of me sees it as even more allegorical than that. The poem may just be the maturation of one single mind told as this group jaunt into a strange landscape. I really can't say for sure, but that's kind of what I love about it. Now, as for my overall thoughts on what I read here, I'm going to address you directly, Gabrielle. It seems like you don't use a strict meter or rhyme scheme in most of your poems, which isn't a problem. Not every poem needs to have that. I think some poems can certainly benefit from it, but most of those I read worked just fine. That said, there were a few moments where I felt the rhythm slipped, or the phrase was constructed a little awkwardly to try and conform to the rhythm. I was definitely taken by the diction. There were a lot of words in here that really surprised me, honestly. And I'm a sucker for narrative poetry, so I was so glad to see you sprang for stories in most, if not all, of your poems. I particularly liked the piece about going into a coal mine with a canary. I thought that was a unique take on that idea. Now, as for my suggestion, and you can obviously ignore this, but given your diction and your storytelling capabilities, I'd be so interested to see what kind of free verse poems you could produce. Your rhythm and rhyme are never bad, but still, seeing what you can do like this makes me interested to see you try other formats. I will say it again multiple times in this video, but I love collections that have a nice variance in style and form. Gabrielle's book is available on Amazon, and you can follow her on Instagram. Links for all of our authors today will be down in the description. And that'll take us into our next book, Trauma and Other Teddy Bears by Roma Ayako. The introduction tells us very clearly what this book is all about, and I think it's more than worthy subject matter for poetry. I can definitely see these poems resonating with many people. To quote Roma, there is an assortment of triggering topics in here. I will not read them all, but you can see for yourself. The poem I want to single out won't create a panic attack in anyone or anything like that, I imagine. It's also much appreciated that Roma includes the suicide hotline number in the dedication, given how heavy this book can be. My favorite piece from this collection is called We're Just Kids. The slobber-mouthed baby eats cigarettes for supper, with blackened feet and knees scraped from crawling under yellow-stained walls like industrial sunshine, never to see the outside until he's older. His lungs are clogged, his laugh a cough. He dreams of tailed fairies and non-scary women to carry him down the cracked staircase. I can do nothing but give him my hands as a safe space, even though I've never raised a child. When he cries, I think he knows it too. This poem, in my opinion, had the most interesting language of those I read. I thought the phrases eats cigarettes for supper and industrial sunshine were pretty good. The poem raises questions for me that lead to a deeper understanding. For example, what does it mean that the baby never gets to see the outside until he's older? What a curious phrase. The poem is asking me to engage with it on a deeper level, and I like that. I think the title also amplifies the meaning, which is the most you can ask for from a title. Even as parents, it's hard not to feel we're still kids. Just kids raising kids, unsure of what we're doing, trying to leave the next generation better than our own. When it comes to my overall thoughts on this book, let me first say page numbers, please, it's a must. As for another note about formatting, you can see that Roma plays around a lot with font, which I'm sure some people will like, but personally it's not really my thing. This book is easy to read with how plain the language is, but it's also hard to read because Roma is describing such horrific things so plainly. On the back of the book, Roma says they've competed in spoken word competitions, which doesn't surprise me. I would say, in general, spoken word poetry is supposed to be very digestible since, in theory, the audience might only hear the poem once. In another frame of mind, it also makes sense to approach gruesome topics with total clarity. But let me address you now, Roma. Going forward, I would really love to see you tackle more metaphors. There are moments where I see you using them, but I kind of wish you would go even deeper in those instances. There is certainly power in poignancy and telling it like it is, but I think many times those moments have to be earned or built up to through strong symbolism, imagery, and other literary devices. I think going that route will make each poem that much more distinct from the others. Granted, that's just me. I'm sure a lot of people love poetry where the language is more direct. And as I said, with subject matter like this, I certainly understand the more direct approach. Roma's book is available on Amazon. The link is down below. With that, we'll move on to Lunas y Moons by Ivan Brave. So full disclosure on this one, Ivan has been one of my subscribers basically since the beginning of this channel. So back when I had far fewer subscribers, he sent me an advanced copy of this book and asked if I would write a foreword for it. I liked it, so I agreed. Ivan caught me at a very good time to do this. I think it was just before I started my MFA program, or I was in between semesters or something. In any case, I had time. These days, I probably wouldn't. I'm sorry if that's something you would like from me, but for the time being, I don't think I could do that sort of thing again. Still, I'll just go ahead and read the foreword, as I think it explains my overall thoughts on the collection. I've read a lot of literature in my time. Reading prose and poetry is about all I do on my YouTube channel. It can certainly make a person tired of contemporary literature. But just when I thought I was sick of deconstructions, Ivan sent me his book. Where many deconstructions fall short, Lunas y Moons is a book with its priorities in order. Ivan knows not to place experimentation above a good story. Deconstructions of English alone often feel tired. However, Ivan's examinations are refreshingly surrounded by other languages. The text calls to mind the Van Goethe quote, "He who knows no foreign language knows nothing of his mother tongue." Many books reward readers for the time put in. Lunas y Moons is the type of book that can reward the reader over and over again. An initial reading will lift the reader off the ground. Subsequent readings will fire the reader skyward, like neurons in the brain or rockets up to the exosphere. Much like a poet attempting a translation, the reader will find treasured layers in this work. More readings will point to more treasures. The deeper layers in the text may seem cosmically out of reach. Don't let that be a dissuading factor. Confront the confusion until understanding reflects and reaches your world. Each word herein is placed carefully. Each phrase is crafted with measure. Even the sections that read like prose present an enrapturing, undeniable poetic quality. When taken as a whole, these words spell out honesty and vulnerability. Perhaps the only thing that rivals the book's honesty is the research put in. The careful reader will note how closely honesty and history intertwine. Lunas y Moons presents a veneer of crudity in its motifs and humor. The reader who looks closer, who really looks at the moon through their telescope, will realize the craters are not really faces. Then they'll find the real faces. I would probably edit this a tiny bit if I had the opportunity, but I think it still gets my feelings across accurately. My favorite piece in the book is actually a short story called The Most Famous Dead in Houston, but it's too long for me to read and comment on here. Instead, we'll look at Ivan's translation of a poem by Federico Manuel Peralta Ramos. I love literary translation. I could do a whole video on it, though that probably wouldn't do well algorithmically. In any case, I won't talk about Ivan's choices in translation. Instead, we'll just talk about the content of the poem. Afar. Once I wanted to go very far, and I got so far, in fact, that later I didn't know how to return. Of course, I didn't remember where I came from, and making it far is wonderful because far away everything is so much lighter. People make sense. The birds are the same as in any other place, and when evening sets there, far becomes afar. I think the central question in this piece is what exactly the difference is between far, far away, and afar. And frankly, I don't have an answer, but I love that the poem and poet invites us to question that. I think this piece has an interesting humor to it, particularly in the lines, the birds are the same as in any other place. It's like the speaker is trying to convince themselves of something but ultimately can't. Part of me wants to read the poem as a tale of disillusionment and dissatisfaction, the idea that changing your physical circumstances won't actually change you as a person. True change comes from within, and running from place to place won't give you what you need in this life. You might be physically where you want to be, but internally far from who you want to be. But you can tell me I'm reaching. I certainly see other possible interpretations for this piece, and I'd love to hear all your thoughts on this one. And while we're on the subject, Ivan, I would love to see more translation from you if you're up for it and able. I think Ivan just barely released a new book, so you can check that one out too if you'd like. Ivan's books are available on Amazon. You can also follow his Facebook, Instagram, and personal blog. Links for all are down in the description. And that'll move us into Ode to Hope and Despair by Ilana Kovalle. Our preface here explains the book is a progression from depression to hope, and an attempt for Ilana to introduce the past depressed self to the present happy self, so that both selves can reconcile with one another. In my 30-minute read-through, I unfortunately didn't reach the hope section, but I think I can still provide some worthy overall thoughts. My favorite poem was this one, Snowflake. A snowflake gets tangled in her lashes, and a second later it is freed by a soft clash with the eyelid, and she feels it rushing down the hill of her cheekbone, into the curve of her dimple. You're not my tear, but you're welcome to join me on this sweet morning. The tickles in my nose catch me between sneezing and laughing, as tears welcome the brightness of the world around. A snowflake falls onto her cheek, and a moment later a warm stream emerges from the tiny creation of the cold, and she feels it rushing down to crush on the cliff of her collarbone, as it changed its very nature. You're not my tear, but you're welcome to die on my cheek all the same tonight. My cheeks are very good for dying on, until, by broken streetlights, 2 graveyards of lost hopes, with tears mourning every last one of them. The snowflakes did not know that between the tickles and the graveyards stood a single night. Frankly, I just really like this poem on the conceptual level. I think the idea of a snowflake as a nomadic tear is super neat, definitely good grounds for a poem. I like the speaker's dialogue with each of the snowflakes. That feels quirky without taking away from the mood of the poem. This piece also feels a lot less didactic than some of the others in the book, and I like that it opens itself up to more interpretations and close readings. Now, as for overall thoughts, I think there are some neat metaphors and visuals in a lot of the poems. There's this piece called Soap Bubbles, about bubbles that freeze in cold temperatures right when you blow them. I love that as a symbol. There's a nice mix of more explicitly rhythmic pieces as opposed to the more free verse ones. As I said before, I like diversity in a poetry collection. Ilana, I can tell you really like parallelism as a device, which is great, I do too. But any author has to be really conscious of their favorite words, devices, and structures, lest they pop up too much. Just by watching my videos, I'm sure you can very easily glean what words and structures I tend to favor in my writing. I think what I'd like to see more of in your future collections would be, in general, a little more trimming. I don't mind a longer poem at all, but a poem of any length, in my opinion, has to justify that length. Short poems ought to speak volumes, while long poems really ought to keep me engaged throughout. I say this as someone whose first drafts are almost always too long. There's power in being pithy. I even wrote a whole poem about that myself. So, Ilana, try and challenge yourself with word limits. See how far you can whittle down your poems while still retaining exactly what you want to get across. I think you'll find you can craft some excellent pieces that way. This book is kind of similar to Roma's in subject matter, which makes me re-emphasize what I said there. There are a lot of poems about grief, depression, and other such topics. And while every single one is valuable, what sets yours apart? You've already got some great symbols here. Capitalize on that skill. I hope you get what I'm saying. Ilana's link trees are down in the description where you can find her book, as well as her socials and other projects. But from there we'll move into Growing Pains by Anastatia Caraballo. Speaking of lengthy poems, Anastatia's poems certainly can be. Lengthy, I mean. Her first poem is 3 pages long and she opts for prosaic stanzas. I would categorize this style of poetry under the lyric essay form. I think it works here because, for one thing, there's a compelling narrative to latch onto with lots of gears turning all together. That, in my opinion, certainly justifies the length. As for my favorite poem, I want to give a quick honorable mention to Rolling Stone, another lengthier one. But my very favorite is probably American Grand Opening. Our bodies open, yawns escape slumbering joints and muscles as we stretch side to side. Another unspoken answered prayer. We've awakened for another day. For some reason, maybe blindly following the unbridled laws of chaos, our hearts still beat uncertain palpitations. Lungs still contract and expand against our will. Against all understanding, neurons still fire away, pinballing commands to the rest of our obedient bodies. Fatigued limbs posing as arms raise above migrained heads. Neck literally snaps, crackles, and pops its way to consciousness. But now what? Lead legs dangle off passionless beds. Toes curl within 2 warm socks, trying to lead the charge into another square of our calendar, into perpetual busyness. Minds falter, unwilling to continue blooming for menial work. Stomachs churn, last night's uncomfortable and necessary conversations sitting undigested. Psyches shudders, decides to call in sick for a mental health day as our bodies turn to autopilot, open for business. So on a first reading, the poem reads as a unique way to describe late-stage capitalism and how that's got us all feeling, the very literal effects work has on our bodies and minds. But also, I feel like there's a brief window into this speaker's life that intrigues me to no end. The details about passionless beds and necessary conversations sitting undigested makes it sound like the speaker is having some trouble in their marriage as well, which goes to illustrate that the need to work for a living even affects our intimacy and our ties with the people we love most. So, on top of the unique language, the selection of detail here is just 10 out of 10 for me. Again, I'll say that variance in form makes for an engaging collection, and Anastatia, you certainly have that going for you here. I really liked the lyric essay poems. Granted, as I said before, I'm a sucker for narrative poetry, and those lengthier poems that stood out definitely had a narrative element to them. So I'm going to say that I'd love to see even more narrative poems from you, especially with more fiction and metaphor. Your memoir and autobiographical poems are great, don't stop writing those either, but I'm super interested to see what a story of your own invention might look like in verse. Anastatia's book is available on Amazon and at Finishing Line Press's website. You can also check out her Instagram and her author's site. That'll take us into our next book, Letters to the Ghosts of My Past by Ayako Gullickson. I'm going to break the format here and start with some overall thoughts and what I'd like to see more of from Aya, then move into my favorite poem. First of all, again, page numbers, please. But more importantly than that, I appreciate all the swings at rhythm and rhyme. There are moments where I feel the form truly impacts me. That said, Aya, I would love for you to try even more structured stuff going forward to get an even better handle on rhythm and rhyme, because I feel there are moments where it slips. Try writing sonnets, if only just for you. That'll help your rhythm all in all. You could also write more free verse stuff, then you don't have to worry about trying to force a rhyme or a phrase. Basically, and this is my advice to all poets no matter where you're at, just keep reading and writing a wide array of poetry. Moreover, I think a lot of these poems would really benefit from more specific details. Sometimes a poem does seem general and universal while still being individually impactful, but I feel the more poetry I read, the more I long for personalization and specificity. Let me give you an example. This poem is titled Unable. Unable to articulate how fast my innocent love for you has turned into raging hate. For you have poisoned my peace with your fake love and tales of fate. You made me believe that love isn't calm and storms are what makes us soulmates. I am truly unable to comprehend how is it that I let you this far in and allowed my boundaries to bend for the smallest man that's ever lived, one whose heart has always been dead. This poem would benefit from some showing versus telling. How did this relationship go so far downhill? How did the speaker go so starkly from love to hate? You don't even have to make those details true or autobiographical. You can make them up, but those moments will separate this poem from all other poems like it. You know what I mean? So, with that in mind, let me show you my favorite poem, Gemini. You keep my hair tie on your wrist and the notebook I gave you as a gift, as the ultimate proof of your wishful love, also to keep me hanging by a hopeful thread. Knowing very well you still sleep in her bed, but it isn't as simple as you think, so you said, that I should be understanding instead, that you love me but you need time, and how can I doubt those tears you shed? That's why you disappear and come back nonstop, yet you only call when she doesn't pick up. What kind of love is it when it's undeserved, where you treat she who loves you like a mop? See, I loved you so dearly with all your shades, even those you tried to hide from everybody. I didn't know I was only sharpening your blades, for you couldn't love me enough not to hurt me. I pity these lines, I pity the lover I am. I was so in love, I took the breadcrumbs, tried to harvest them and grow something real. I was so in love, it disgusts me. That now, I don't ever want to feel anything, ever again. So this one starts with some nice details, some specific windows into this relationship. The note about the hair tie and the journal is neat, and those are exactly the kinds of things I'd like to see in a poem like this. I also love the idea of harvesting breadcrumbs and trying to grow more bread, the futility of that, the false hope. There are moments like that here in this collection where I think you, Aya, have written something unique and intriguing. I do wish you'd gone a little deeper, but there's nothing stopping you from writing an entirely separate poem about that one concept. Aya's book is available on Amazon, and you can follow her on Instagram. Both of those links are down below. And with that, we'll move on to Born on the Border by Lorena de Luna. Once again, this introduction is very clear, and I'm just going to read the first two paragraphs verbatim because I think Lorena puts it very well. Media portrayals of Mexican Americans as criminals create a narrow, manufactured perspective that fuels negative stereotypes. There are so many untold stories of life on the United States-Mexico border. This poetry collection is intended to paint a fuller picture of what it is to be Mexican American from a border town. Definitely great subject matter for a collection, and honestly very necessary in this time. Here is, I think, my favorite piece from the book. Mexican Dental Hall. Skipping over the cracks embedded in the Mexican roads, the sidewalk is unpaved, the dental care is cheaper here. My memory is hazy, blocked out the tools and tweezing, but I remember the vomiting. The wood vinyl paneling half peeling, losing their 70s luster. You can smell the glue failing. The waiting room is enough for two. What could a child do? Followed the dentist to his home operation, an operation chair in his dining room, for my dad's next filling. I'd sit in the living room, flipping through TV channels. So kind of like I was just talking about with Aya's collection, I really love the windows the specific details present in this poem. This poem effectively uses imagery to achieve its goal. I get a certain perspective here about what it's like to live on the border. There's a consideration here that I never even considered, that you would cross over to either side for certain conveniences. I also like that this poem ends on an image rather than on some reflection or mental conclusion. Obviously, all poems are going to be different, but I think images are usually good exit routes as they leave something more to ponder on. I do want to also give honorable mentions to these two poems, Maria and Pointing the Finger. The former has some interesting ruminations on religion and womanhood, while the latter is a rather interesting metaphor for how the culture war keeps us from achieving class consciousness. As for my overall thoughts, I'll kind of reiterate what I said with Mexican Dental Hall, but I think this collection is at its best when it's giving us snippets into the life of someone who was, as the title says, born on the border. I love the imagery and scenes that we're often dropped into, and Lorena, I kind of wish there were more of that. Readers love to be voyeurs, so it's always fun when we see something we wouldn't normally see. Maybe something we're not even supposed to see. And it takes me back to why I read poetry. To empathize, to get a glimpse into somebody else's world. And the more specific the glimpse, the better. This isn't always the case, but oftentimes I think poetry is at its strongest when it lets the visuals speak for themselves. You let the reader see with their own eyes. You guide them to water, and they decide how and when to drink, so guide them as best you can. I hope I'm making sense. Lorena's book is available through Barnes & Noble, and you can check out her blog, Instagram, and TikTok for more of her poetry, as well as more on the book and the process behind it. And from there, we'll move on to Hexian, Poetic Divine by Jetta, J.B. Thinsopha Masters. In the preface, Jetta explains they're sort of trying to emulate a mythology here akin to the Bible, the Poetic Edda, the Divine Comedy, the works of Homer, and many other works of that nature. The subtitle, Poetic Divine, is taken straight from the Poetic Edda and the Divine Comedy. But Jetta also explains that this book is a subjective biography with the veneer of mythology over it, and I think that's cool. This poem, simply titled 4 in Roman numerals, is probably my favorite. For once, in the time of many years past, the Grey Lady, the one who wears 2 of many masks, it wanders the forest with a head by its hip. Men see it as a stag with the moon on its head, but those akin see the true silk of its silver blood. For many days and many raised moons, it wandered the plain of men, searching. For what? Not even the Grey Lady knew. With frustration, it reaches for the severed head and looks into its eyes. The forest around it changes. The winds grow stronger, the trees cast a darker shadow. The grass becomes greener, and the rains and flowing waters stop in its place. But it is calm around the Grey Lady. It looks deep into the eyes of the head. A sense of true hatred is leaking from the Grey Lady's mask. It looks up from the lifeless head to see 4 eyes coming greet. An elk with a golden moon upon its head. It stares only for a moment, but long enough. It turns its head towards the north. Walk to where the golden moon sets, and adverse to where it rises. I would say this is probably the strangest of the poems I read, and I'm drawn to it for that reason. I really wish the rest of the book had leaned more into the whole mythology angle and had gotten weird, you know? And this one is weird, and I like that. With some of the other poems, I felt the allegory was kind of in your face, which I think is fine in some instances. Obviously, allegories are meant to be understood. But here I feel like there's more interpreting that I have to do, and the symbols are so odd and unique that I'm happy to put in that work. Granted, in all honesty, I'm still not sure how to interpret this one. I'm still thinking it over. I'm partial to the idea that the Grey Lady is a metaphor for winter, and in a wider sense, a metaphor for perhaps seasonal depression. But I really can't say for sure. As for some overall thoughts, Jetta, I can tell you like to play with language, especially pronouns. Like, there are many moments where the correct pronoun would be me, but the piece uses I instead. If it happened just once, I'd think it was an error. But things like that happen so much, I see it's part of the style. I don't know if it's my cup of tea personally, but I can at least appreciate swings like that. Like I said, I wish the mythology angle were tackled even harder. A lot of the poems in the first section have an angel motif, which is neat, but I kind of wish the whole world were filled out with more bizarre personages, you know? This is going to sound like an insult, so I want to clarify that it isn't. But a lot of this book kind of sounds like angsty poetry for a teenage audience. And again, that's fine. There's value in angsty poetry for teenagers. I remember reading one poem in particular about a boy in a play and thinking, oh, this would have killed for 13-year-old Jonah. To you, Jetta, I would say in your future works, be very conscious of cliches, both in phrasing and subject matter. It's fine to write a poem about a rose or the sun, but how will you separate that work from the many other poems tackling that same subject matter? Jetta let me know that the press selling the book unfortunately went out of business, which is a huge bummer. But if you want to listen to their music, be sure to check out their Spotify and Instagram, links down below. Next up is In Singularity by Hà Minh. In the intro, Ha explains who she is, what she does, how she got to be a writer, and much more. In looking at Ha's book, it seems like she's more interested in visual art than in poetry, which is fine. I do think the art is quite eye-catching. I took a very brief look at Ha's second book, wherein the text is de-emphasized and it's way more about the visuals. But as far as the first book goes, this poem was probably my favorite. When fallen leaves levitate as if roots were only temporary, and reattachments become new beginnings. When coldness rewinds its skin-numbing winds and becomes a new spring, and spring says nothing but lets summer retrieve water from the streams of her hair, to make fresh rain on new lands. On my two wobbly feet I learn to walk again, following the whisper land and sea have been exchanging since the beginning of time. When I am the smallest being in your arms, feels like melting atop ocean waves. I strip off the first layer of my epidermis to build a boat and set sail for summer. That's when I become friends with the seasons. I strip off another layer to form a kite and fly it into wet clouds. Once there, I strip off another layer to make a parachute and jump down with the rain. Earthbound, I strip off yet another layer to craft a raft and float it down the river to where the tides are. And I follow the seasons, one cycle after another, getting lighter and lighter, skin shed layer by layer again and again. I can feel it, my body barely intact, held together by one last layer of skin. Help me. Strip off my final epidermis and stretch it out the way summer stretches spring's waterfall hair into rivers and tides, until my skin becomes big enough to envelop all the future secrets we share. Will you keep stretching and stretching it while I tell you about the time my skin reached eternity and the place it reached infinity? If earthlings say fabric of the cosmos. Without skin, do you think I'm just fibers of being? There is an egg that gets stuck between two rocks by the seashore. The rock on the left spells child, the rock on the right spells birth. But neither rock knows my name or its meaning. I walk into the middle of the two rocks and spell out bright water in my mother's tongue so that sea salt can engrave my whisper onto the egg letter by letter, wave by wave. It's okay for the child within to be afraid of how comfortable it is in the dark. In my shadow, I find the unspoken words I never say aloud but always wish you knew. Do you already know? There are more stars in the universe than grains of sand on Earth. Just based on what I've said in this video so far, you can probably imagine that I love this visual and this idea of peeling off layers of skin to serve as tools and situational fixes. That's really unique, definitely the kind of thing that belongs in a poem. On top of that, I also love all the language before that sequence describing the seasons and the natural world. Pretty beautiful language, if you ask me. Now, I will note this poem is a little long, and that'll take me into my overall thoughts on the book. I think my suggestion to you, Ha, would be to tighten up your poems a little bit. I do like this poem a lot, but I wonder if it's trying to juggle too many knives. All readers have an attention budget, and there's only so many things they can spend on at a time. A poem about seasons? Sure, totally. A poem about seasons and about layers of skin? Stretching it a little bit, but still fine. But add on more than that, I start to wonder if maybe this one poem should actually be multiple poems. I feel like it kind of gets away from itself in this last third. But as I pointed out, Ha's next book seems to limit the text more. I think there's a balance. As I said earlier in this video, a poem of any length kind of has to justify why it's as short or as long as it is. I don't mind a wordy or long-winded poem, as long as it's focused and comprehensible. Ha's books are available on Amazon. You can also check out her art on Instagram. As mentioned, those links are down below. That takes us into Stepping Raven Learns to Fly by Eli Godfrey. The poem I want to highlight from this collection is probably this one here, titled For Harvey. When the muse is here, I think, alright poems every day. Share this strange journey via the stylized word. Like Bloom lubricating his gorgonzola sandwich with burgundy at Davy Byrne's. Or me, lying in the tub, leg bouncing, picar of poetry, prose-bound Picasso. In this fantasy, I go about my life, and the poems just fall out once or twice a day. I slide them tastefully, without eye contact, to my publisher, who takes care of the not-fun work. That's how I imagine Mary Oliver lived. But the muse, sometimes she leaves, and doesn't say where she's going, or when she'll be back. And I'm like the tree in the park that looks thin and damp and bare of leaves, even when the sun is shining. I'll be honest, I'm not actually sure if this is my favorite from the book, but I do think it's emblematic of a certain type of poetry Eli writes. I would classify Eli's works into two categories, the thinker poems and the anecdotes. This is more of a thinker, as it's not telling any real lived experience like many of the other poems in this book do. This poem also demonstrates how well Eli can use humor. I like the idea of poems falling out of a person, which is actually something I've explored in a piece of my own. But in Eli's language, it's just so funny, the laziness and nonchalance of it, almost as if the poems were, I don't know, excrement. I love it. I remember one faculty member in my program once said that the only people who like poems about poetry are poets themselves, and maybe that's true. Still, I think there's some charm here. I like the mention of other writers, there's some good humor in that too. The title also certainly makes me wonder. As for overall thoughts, Eli, I think your work is comparable to Charles Bukowski, but I would say I generally like your subject matter more than I like his. Your work is highly anecdotal and written in terms pretty much anyone could understand. I like that your poems revolve around all sorts of different people, including yourself. The experiences in this book are well written, and they give me those windows that I've pointed out I enjoy so much in poetry. If I were to suggest what I might like to see from you in the future, it would be a variance in structure. I see that you have a style, and it clearly works for you. But why not try changing it up to see what might come out? Your shorter lines and stanzas make sense given your focus on clarity, but I'd be curious to see where a longer line might take you. I do also want to note I really liked your poem about an imagined conversation with a mosquito in the sink. I think more poetry like that could also be worth your time. The snippets of real life are always going to intrigue me, but so will wacky premises. Eli's books are available on Amazon, his author page is linked below. That'll take us to Sad Rhymes for Grownups by Corinne Prado. My favorite piece in this collection is titled Flashing Back, Lashing Out. Bombs explode in my body, sirens scream in my head. Shots are fired, things are going haywire. I wish more and more I was dead. Giving off violent reactions to touch that is meant to be kind is the hair shirt I wear that I've been forced to bear. If only it were all in my mind. That hair shirt bit on line 10 is probably my favorite thing in this book. I had never heard of a hair shirt before reading this poem. According to Wikipedia, it's a garment or undergarment made of coarse cloth or animal hair worn close to the skin, and according to Google, it's worn by penitents or those seeking repentance and forgiveness from God. I think it's a fine metaphor, demonstrating, among other things, how the things going on inside us can afflict us physically too. I do wish the metaphor had gone a little deeper, but that's fine. As with many of the poems in this book, I read this piece as touching on some of the stigmas around mental health, with the mention of it's all in my mind or it's all in your head, a common way to dismiss those with mental health conditions. Corinne's style, kind of as the title suggests, evokes the simplest of children's tropes, and I don't mean that as an insult. I love writing poetry with the tropes of children's poetry. In Corinne's case, these poems are extremely digestible and accessible to anyone. If you're an adult who's been removed from poetry for years and years, this would be a fine place to pick it up again. If you like poetry that's very conclusive or explicit, and by that I mean very direct with its meaning and moral, then this would certainly be the collection for you. Now, to address you directly, Corinne, this is another collection that would benefit from more showing and less telling. I'll give you 2 quick examples. This poem is called Sticky Memories. It reads, "Sometimes you take in the scene, on occasions you'll like to recall. Some scenes seem to stay stuck in your mind. Those are the worst scenes of all." So I think the obvious and immediate question when reading this poem is, what kind of scenes is the author talking about? This is a poem that would really benefit from an example. Show us a scene we might like to recall, then show us a scene that we can't help but recall against our will. That, I think, would make for a really effective poem. Or, as another example, there's this poem called Oof. I've been crazy, I've been sane, but most of all, I've been in pain. Any poet, any person for that matter, could say these things, but I won't really know what these statements mean until you show me what they mean. What does it look like for the speaker to be crazy, to be sane, and to be in pain? This is how I try to edit a lot of my poetry. I look for any declarations I make and ask myself, would it be better to use an image or an experience here instead of a statement? I hope you see what I mean, Corinne. The hair shirt is a good example of showing versus telling. Even though it's a metaphor and not a literal showing, it still gives me a physical idea of what the speaker is experiencing. Corinne's book is available on Amazon through the link below. And our last book for today will be The 3 a.m. Club by R.D. Mohilev. In the introduction, R.D. shares some thoughts about art, how it's meant to be observed, and how the meaning is ultimately made by you. And I agree. Art is nothing without the observer. Poetry is nothing without the reader. And ultimately, R.D.'s goal, as is the goal for everyone in this video I imagine, is to inspire you, perhaps to create something of your own, which is great. I think my favorite piece was one of the limericks, this one called Wishful Thinking. He stood tall and proud just like a knight. He held his sword and shield with might. He swung it with grace, but he fell on his face. So the butcher stopped playing knight. So on an initial reading, this poem elicited a little chuckle from me, but on closer inspection, the piece actually made me a little sad. Like, the joke is plain, right? At first you think the subject is this grandiose dude, but then the poem reveals he's just a butcher, and there's some humor in that. But then I have to wonder, is this poem saying something about a person's role in the world, about aspirations and dreams? Is the butcher just doomed to be a butcher and never anything more? I really like poems that can pull the rug out from under me, not just once, but twice. I feel like there are multiple layers to unpack here. R.D.'s poems kind of remind me of Dickinson's, but only in the sense that they don't always rhyme where you'd expect, but still feel like they do anyway because of the rhythm. R.D., because your style is so whimsical, I want to encourage you to try even more whimsical, out there subject matter. I really liked the poems where birds started talking. That was neat. I would love to see more of that sort of thing from you. I think it would go well with your style. R.D.'s book is available on Amazon, and check out their Instagram for more. Now for some concluding thoughts on this whole endeavor. I'm going to level with you guys. I did not love some of these collections, and I probably would not have read them if they hadn't been sent to me. But that's not what this video is about. I want this to be all about encouragement. Just because some of these weren't my cup of tea doesn't mean they're not for anyone. And it certainly doesn't mean you will dislike them either. Poetry is so broad. There's kind of an audience for everything, which is awesome. I still wanted to read these collections because they were sent to me. And a big part of me making this video was to kind of force myself to make time for these. Because it really warms my heart when people share their literature, even if it's ultimately not my thing. If you have tried to send me your book before, please try again. Emails and DMs can get lost in the shuffle, and I'm so forgetful. But I'd love to make another video like this, truly. A lot of times in writing, there can be this selfish mentality. Like, oh, it's great that my friend won a contest, but when will it be my turn? Or awesome that my peer just got their book published, but when will it be my turn? I always told myself that once I had a bigger platform, I would start highlighting all kinds of authors. But at this point, I'm kind of like, why wait? I have a decent amount of subscribers. My videos tend to get at least 10,000 views a pop, which isn't nothing. So I want to encourage everyone to do something after watching this video. I want you, if the money is there, to buy a book from a lesser-known author. It can be one of the books in this video, but it doesn't have to be. I love to go to local bookstores because they often feature local authors who don't usually have national recognition. So, that's your task after watching this video. Go support another author out there. Coming to the end of this video, as always, I want to thank my patrons for their support. I truly could not do this without them. If you want to support the channel too, for as little as $3 a month, you can receive sweet perks like seeing videos early and access to the community Discord. If you want to support the channel in other important ways, liking, subscribing, commenting, hyping, all of those things really do help, and I would super appreciate it. You can also follow me on my socials if you want, but no matter what, keep reading, keep writing, and ultimately keep in mind, this is a rough draft. Lastly, I want to leave you all with a writing prompt. I think a lot of the best poetry comes from trying to say something in a way it's never been said before. Uniqueness is a must when it comes to poetry, so I want you to write a poem about one or all of these symbols: a heart, the sky, and or lemons. However, you cannot use any of the following words: love, feeling, blood, bleed, pump, red, veins, heaven, cloud, blue, vast, up, above, God, yellow, sour, citrus, squeeze, and peel. Hopefully, that'll yield some creative results for you. Get to writing.